All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Would everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's not start those conversations. We'll never get out of here tonight. In terms of announcements, the public is hereby advised of the audio and video recording of this meeting for the purpose of rebroadcasting. Also, I'd like to make a note, an executive session was held tonight, July 19th, 2016, prior to this meeting for matters of personnel regarding administrative employees. In way of attendance, all members are present except for Mr. Phillips. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Zerbe.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, everyone. This evening we have one presentation, and then we have the rest of the work session agenda items. Just before we partake in this presentation, several months ago we contracted with Robert Schock to help provide some services to support the transportation aspect of the district. Mr. Schock has done several things for us internally, from a matter resolving putting some policies and procedures in place to help the Methacton transportation manager and the manager for a student work more collaboratively together, and to address many of the matters that once plagued us back in the fall of this past school year. So while we've worked through those things, we've also asked them to do an evaluation of our routes, because quite frankly, the routes probably, like in any school district, while we do a good job and our drivers do a good job, we tend to, as routing typically goes, tend to just make those minor adjustments over year to year to try to make sure that we don't change too much for our current customers, as well as try to provide some reasonable routes for the new customers that happen to be taking up those new seats. And in doing so, sometimes we lose track of what it is that we could do to provide maybe a more efficient or effective routes and transportation services. So what we did was we asked Mr. Schock to reach out with the software company that we use, BusBoss, and they provided us some feedback. And I think this evening Mr. Schock is going to present some information, and that's what it is, information that we're not asking for a vote or anything this evening, but we're asking for your consideration as we try to think through the information before us, and we try to make the best decision for the Methacton School District going forward. So with that, I'm going to ask the board to please take their seats in the front row. Mr. Schock has about 10 or 15 slides. There should be a handout in front of you, and then we'll return back to our seats for some question and answer sessions.
Good evening, Bob. Good to see you. Okay, good evening. As Dr. Zerbe explained, this is an update, a progress report to let you know where we are at this time when we're developing the routes. So the purpose is to just review the progress on that routing efficiency, explain how these optimized routes were developed, contrast them with last year's routes, and then the board and community need to decide how much change do they want to implement. Typically, as one grade enters the building and another leaves, there's a significant amount of change to the number of stops and the location of the students. So there's always quite a bit of change to be dealt with. But when we do a complete optimization of a district, there is more change. And so some students who previously had short rides might have longer rides. Drivers might need to become familiar with new routes. So we're also going to touch on the amount of communication needed and then obtain some final guidance before we spend the next month completing the routing. So the routing method is that we provided the software company, working with a 20-year employee who's now the president of the company, developed these routes. And we provided the maximum ride time. We gave them a limit of 1 hour for the public runs in the district. And then we worked with a seating capacity, although the bus manufacturer calls a 38-inch seat a 3-person seat. For the secondary level, it's really 2. And at the elementary, we've been using 2.5. Now, so the method is that all students must be advanced to their new school. Some students will need to be assigned to a new bus stop. And then there are really 2 phases of routing. First of all the students are assigned to a stop, then enough stops are assigned to a bus to fill that bus. And while doing that, you're trying to minimize the mileage and total time spent getting all students to that school. Once you have those maps of all the stops done, the second phase is to combine the runs into a morning or afternoon route. So this means there would start with a high school run, followed by an intermediate school run, followed by an elementary school run. And the question is, how do you want to package those to, again, minimize the total mileage and time? So here's some information. The old system is what was run last year, and the new is the proposed optimized routes. The total number of bus runs is 106 last year, 89 this year. The total number of buses that would be required, and this is just the public buses. This is not for the regular education program. This is not the non-public buses, nor is it the special ed schools for students placed in out of school district placements. But last year, 55 buses were used for the regular education. We're proposing 39, or the optimized routes call for 39. What we're going to discuss here later tonight is whether we want to adjust that 39 upwards. The total ride time for all of those 106 routes last year was 96 hours. With the optimization, it's now down to 65 hours. That represents a 32% reduction in the amount of time, which is an indicator of the efficiency of those maps. The total loaded mileage is pretty close, 922 versus 990, but the unloaded miles have been reduced dramatically from 504 to 310. So that means that another measure of efficiency is that you have a lower percentage of unloaded to loaded miles. So the total ride time been reduced by 32%, the number of bus runs 17%, the total miles 17%, and the unloaded miles 38%. So what we're saying is that the optimization is significantly more efficient and involves fewer buses. Now let's talk about the number per school. Last year, the original versus the optimized routes. They're saying they can get all the students to Arcola with 15, not 21. Arrowhead would be the same. Audubon would be 1 less. Eagleville the same. The high school, 3 less. Skyview, 2 less. Visitation, 1 less. Woodland, 1 less. Worcester, 3 less. So what that means is 106 runs going to 89 with the optimization. Now here's how we like to look at this. Let me explain this to all of you. What we have is on the left side the original runs of last year versus the optimized runs. Every dot represents a bus. So this dot here would be a bus that's running approximately 46 minutes, and it has about 35 riders on it. 35 riders read off this scale, and the minutes read off this scale. Excuse me. Hit the wrong button there. I'll go back to the high school. Okay, so that was this bus that we were looking at. So what we have here are buses at the high school. Typically, with so many students driving, you can overload those buses. So this is the amount of overloading. I'm going to go to a different pointer so I don't keep hitting that. So what we had here were 4 buses over 60 minutes last year. In the optimization, we have no buses over 60 minutes. 1 is at 60, a couple in the high 50s. We still have overloaded the buses on the assumption that 100% of the 9th and 10th graders will ride, 75% of the 11th graders, 50% of the 12th graders. Now, the reason we have this rectangle here is there's been a committee of administrators and parents who've been reviewing this with us, talking about the guidelines, talking about the whole process. And in the meeting held last week, there was discussion about trying to do a little better for buses that may be highly loaded or over 50 minutes. So what we're asking to consider is that we might add 3 more buses into the system to assist at the high school level. That would give us about 150 more capacity, meaning you could take 15 students off 10 buses. So any of these 10 buses here could be reduced to going to the left there with fewer students on them. We would also focus on the time. So we have some time issues. We'd like to get those closer to 50. We have some load issues that we'd like to get back in this direction. So Arcola, in the far corner of the district, also has some long runs. Now last year, there were 5 runs in excess of 60 minutes. With the optimization, there's one at about 61 minutes, but there are also some buses that are slightly overloaded beyond 2 to a seat. An 84-passenger bus with 2 to the seat gives us 50-some. A 72-passenger gives us 48. So what we try to do with this optimization is get a tight cluster of the dots as opposed to a widely dispersed cluster. So again, if you were adding 3 buses at the high school, those 3 buses would be available to do work at Arcola as well as the elementary schools. So Arrowhead, it is a tighter cluster. The number of buses is the same. Audubon, a very tight cluster of buses. And again, though, we'd like you to consider adding 1 more bus into the mix. Skyview, we would add 2 buses. So what that means is if 3 buses are going into Arcola and 2 into Skyview, we would probably have really about 5 buses added into the system. And so those buses would be able to help out at all of the elementary levels. That's visitation of non-public within the district. So what we're looking at here is that we would use those 5 buses to address different situations of more students than we might like and longer times than we would like. Now remember, your geography is such that it's pretty difficult to get the students to these distant schools in less than in 60 minutes in some cases. So those revisions that I showed you in red would show up here so that we would be adding in 3 buses in Arcola's case, 3 buses in the case of the high school, 2 in Skyview, and then we would use those buses throughout the elementaries. And then that would take us back up to 101 routes, and it would take us to this important number. So what we're looking at here is the phase 2, where you have your routes mapped to every school, and now you're saying this high school bus run should be combined with this intermediate bus run, combined with this elementary. And when we do that, in the old system, we had 18 buses that only did 1 tier. We had 22 buses doing 2 tiers and 15 buses doing 3 tiers. What's been achieved here is that now only 3 buses are doing 1 tier, meaning you could get by with 39 versus 55. Now that's a 16 bus reduction. We're saying add 5 more to that. So it wouldn't be 16, it would be 11. And the graph on the right just shows that graphically, that we've put the packaging of the runs into morning and afternoon routes more efficiently. So really there are 3 options. One is to fully implement it as shown initially, no change. The other would be what we're asking you to consider, adding some buses into the system on those specific schools. Then we would go in and reroute those schools in the next month. There are some partial implementation options, but One would be just to deal with the elementaries in year one and then consider what to do in future years. Another would be to deal with the elementary and the high school, but not Arcola and Skyview. So what's been done to date is we've tested a number of the routes to be sure that those times are accurate. So what that involves is getting in a vehicle, driving the route exactly following the route sheet, which gives you turn-by-turn directions, distances along a road, gives you a map to follow those directions as well, just like what you'd get off MapQuest or Google Maps when you navigate from one point to another. What we need to do, though, is get some more drivers, probably another driver, a couple drivers, myself and someone else from the management, to run these routes and be sure that the times are accurate. In doing so, we are finding a few things. We're finding some road closures that we'll have to deal with. We're finding some congested situations that we may have to look at when we reroute and be sure that we have enough time on some congested runs. But all in all, the runs seem to be very accurate. The times seem to be very accurate. What we can't have happen to us is where we assume we can do a run in half an hour and actually it takes 40 minutes, because that would back up the rest of the system and put the second and third tier into a late situation. So what has to happen is the routes need to be tested in the next couple of weeks. Then what we're suggesting is that we do a preliminary notice to the community saying that we're going to make changes and that we'll tell you more about the specifics later in August. And then in August, everyone would get their new bus number, the pickup time, and the bus stop location. Now, we have not changed any of the stop locations. So one thing we're noting as we're driving is situations where we think a couple stops are closer than they would need to be. So in that case, we look at whether we have sidewalks or an unsafe situation due to the volume of traffic or anything else. Now, of course, between now and the end of summer, we have new enrollees and we have withdrawals. So that affects all of the bus routes. And based on the amount of change that we would anticipate, we would have several people in a call center who can answer questions, access the computer information, and that would be open for several weeks just to be sure that we're communicating adequately with parents and responding to them within a reasonable time frame. Now, really, everyone has a role here. All of these runs need to be adjusted for the new enrollees. That will happen over in the transportation office. The drivers need to be trained and do what they're called dry runs without students to be sure that they know where they have to turn, which lane to be in, and so forth. Bus drivers have to know their routes on day one. We can't have confusion. It's good if they show confidence and support for these changes. The call center needs to give timely and accurate information. We'll prepare some frequently asked questions. The superintendent can play a role in explaining the importance of this to various audiences. The school board, by the school code, should give final approval to routes in August. And so we would have a list of routes. We would update these charts that you've seen tonight. And then after that period, you can just refer any calls from the public into the call center and expect them to answer it in a timely fashion. And principals have various roles in communication, both in July and August, and then supervising the dismissal. As we tighten the times up, it's important that those buses get away from the school in the afternoon, depart rapidly, and don't spend too much time at the school. So there needs to be extensive communication. We need to develop these notifications, the frequently asked questions, set up the call center, and all that's pretty clear, but it is a lot of work. So what kind of questions would we anticipate? One is, why was the system changed? And as Dr. Zerbe mentioned, when you just change it a little bit every year, you can get things a bit distorted and unbalanced. And that's what we found here, and that's why there's the potential for savings. What are the advantages? The total ride time was reduced dramatically, and there will be lower cost associated with fewer buses. What are the disadvantages? Well, it's change. Change is hard. Extensive communications required. People will ask if they can change their assigned stop. Could they change to a different bus, the pickup time, and so forth. So that will all be handled out of the call center. A lot of times you get questions about location of bus stops. We purposefully not change the assigned stops. Often as students get older, they might be asked to walk a little farther, but we haven't changed those. We did bring to the attention of the committee a National Highway Traffic Safety Administration set of guidelines for locating school bus stops, so we'll be following that. It's pretty much common sense, but it needs to be, the stop location depends on the traffic volume, the sight distance as cars drive up and down the roadways and so forth. So that's the end of the presentation, and I guess at this point we'll
go back to our seats and we'll open it up for any questions.
All right, I'm sure everybody will have lots of questions. Let's start down at this end. Anybody down there have some questions?
So if you're not.
I do have thank you for your presentation. Series of questions. Can you just tell me who the participants in the subcommittee have been? You said representatives from the community and from the administration.
7 or 8 parents, and then there were administrators, including assistant principals, special ed director, athletic director.
Okay. And
First student representatives?
First students.
That's correct.
And any drivers themselves?
No.
Okay.
At this point.
So, and the number proceed, just to clarify, was 2 for above 7th grade and
Correct.
2.5. Okay.
2.5 on the elementary, assuming the younger kids can sit 3 to a seat, but the older students may not be able to sit 3 to a. By the time they get to 6th, 7th grade, you really have to have 2 to a seat.
Okay. Next question is you mentioned the dry runs have been very successful. Are you adding a fudge factor for summer traffic? Because I know
Correct.
you do have a
Yes.
obviously.
So what we found so far is that we drive the route, we pause at every stop, given the amount of time it would take for students to load, and then we're recording the time at each stop, each turn, and so forth. And what we're finding is generally we're running these runs in the summer here 15 to 20% less time than is on the sheet.
Okay.
So we're finding that pretty consistently. So that is the factor that would be consumed by congestion. And of course, that congestion affects different routes differently. So we certainly need the local knowledge. We need to do more testing. We need to be very careful about any congested intersections and so forth. But that we still have a month to review and revise all of that.
So and just so I understand the process, if we go through these routes and there's the fudge factor is not large enough, so when you're going up 363, it takes you 35% more time than you anticipated in the summer. What are the provisions for adjusting off of that?
These additional buses will be assigned to deal with those issues where we have any concerns.
So these are bus routes to be named later, I guess is the way to explain?
Correct. So
Okay.
when we're talking about adding in these few buses at every school, we would be focused on very specific runs where we might have a concern about congestion or a concern about the length of the time in general being over 50 minutes.
So from that, that means if there's identification that a route is not effective or there's too much time on those routes, that means the current routing has to be changed for everybody related to that in the first month or so?
No, that will be done this summer still. We want to have very few changes necessary after the start of school. So as much as we can get changed in the next month, anticipating the problems, testing all of the runs, that's the ideal situation.
So you would offload some of those buses, is what we're saying, not reroute, do another rerouting?
Correct. It would just be very targeted.
Okay, so it's
To
not
specific-
another optimization, it's just a targeted
correct.
approach to problems?
We would say we have concerns about 2 or 3 buses. Take this one new bus we're adding into the system and be sure you address those concerns on those 2 or 3 buses.
Okay. Do you have any statistics on the current average time on the bus per student comparatively to the proposal?
No, ideally, well, first of all, when we show you a 50 or 60-minute run, often those have a 10-minute time frame from the bus garage to the first stop. Now, what I'm trying to get from the Bus Boss software is to know how many students ride the bus for 50 to 55 minutes, how many 45 to 50, how many 40 to 45, and develop that statistic so that you can understand that, yes, we do have some students with rides on the longer end, but for the bulk of them are within this time frame.
Right, and obviously with the rerouting, you're going to have winners and losers in that time frame, and the actual length time is being reduced. So I assume the assumption would be that it's probably the average is going down, but having that specific statistic would be very helpful for making a decision.
Correct.
Okay.
Once we get a little farther, I believe we will be able to provide that to you.
So 2 other points. Do you see any optimization? You proposed a proposal here of possibly not addressing Arcola and Skyview during this round as one of the options, but it didn't sound like was your preference. Do you see any optimization in combining those if we looked at those schools from a combined perspective from a routing?
I think that would be something that could be considered in a future year, but it's not in the consideration at this time.
Okay. And then I guess it's more of a comment, as I do see this as an efficiency thing that we have to look at, but the number of students on a bus is a concern of mine for the perspective of being able to safely drive and also worry about what's going on behind your back. So when you increase, if you potentially had 70, 80 kids on a bus, I imagine there's usually an expectation. My theory would be you have the potential for more problems when I'm sitting too close to Kim.
Right.
And that type of activity. So is there any soft or any factual information you can give me related to that concern?
I think your concern is a real concern, but the number of routes is not changing dramatically, so the number of students on a bus is not changing dramatically from what you're used to. And overall, their time is going to be reduced because the mapping is more efficient.
Okay.
So
Okay.
hopefully they'll be on less time to have any problems crop up.
Okay, and I lied. I have one more question, sorry. The size of the buses and contractually, since we sold the buses to First Student, and First Student has been using those buses and using our facility to store those buses, if we want them to use certain size buses, are you aware from a contractual perspective that they have to use certain size buses, or are we sort of locked into their inventory, more to say, of what they have today?
Well, at this point, the buses were primarily using our 72 and 84 passenger buses for the regular runs. And if you're replacing buses, you probably want to go to the larger buses, the 84 passenger buses. Your fleet has a large number of the smaller buses, the vans, that are used in non-public and special ed transportation.
But they're not our fleet, right?
That's correct.
So I guess my question is, what is the so we demand, I don't know, 90, 84 passenger buses or whatever, you get the idea, right? If first student does not have the ability to provide 92, 84 passenger buses, what is our recourse? Is there a dependency on first student to have the right inventory to make these changes, is my question.
First of all, I want to look at the contract, but I also want to look at the request for proposals that was done at the time you did that contract to understand what the assumptions were about changing the mix of capacities in the fleet.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Are you sure you're done, Paul?
Might come back.
Okay. Herb, do you have anything? Okay. Kim?
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very thorough and detailed. A couple of the questions that I had, Paul sort of alluded to. I'm concerned with what is the maximum amount of time that students are on the bus, not just the average. And I would love it if you can get Bus Boss to tell us how many students are falling into each category, how many students are going to be on there for more than 55 minutes, 45 to 55, and so on, so that we can see that breakdown before we make any decisions. Have any parent surveys been done to determine if there's a preferred means of transportation? So if you have, populations that are more likely to drive children to school, are those buses looked at as being the potential to be kind of overbooked because those parents are routinely driving, or has any of that been factored into this?
That was a question that came up at the committee. They were saying that one reason parents are driving is because the previous runs were very long. So the question is, if the runs are shortened, will fewer students be driven to school? And this is largely our Skyview and Arcola from the distant part of the district. So that was one of the reasons we said, let's add a few more buses into the system in the event that occurs. More students do ride.
But there was no survey
No,
done?
no survey.
Okay.
But we did have 7 or 8 parents that were discussing all aspects of the program.
Right.
And they've had 2 meetings to date, and there will be a 3rd meeting in August, and then a recap meeting in late September, early October to get their input.
So another question. You're looking at reducing the number of buses used, the number of runs. How does that impact personnel? Would we be eliminating, in eliminating bus runs and the number of buses that we're using, are we going to be eliminating drivers as well?
Okay. Typically, the contractor would have a number of substitute drivers to fill in. There are also extracurricular runs, athletic trips, field trips, and so forth. You may recall last year that First Student had some difficulty filling the positions at the beginning of the year. Some of those were given to another contractor because of that. So all these factors considered, we believe that, and First Student's aware of the numbers you've seen and will adjust accordingly in terms of their hiring of replacement drivers, which is ongoing right now.
But are we are we anticipating that we will have to reduce the number of drivers?
Yes. If you reduce the number of buses, you'll be reducing the number of drivers that First Student needs to provide.
Do we know how many?
Well, it would be approximately 11 on these regular education public runs. Now, on the special ed runs and the non-public runs that you didn't see tonight, those are much more subject to change. For example, you could have a new non-public school open within 10 miles of your boundaries requiring an entirely new bus. You could have a new special ed placement requiring a new bus. So it's not certain that all of those buses would be eliminated from the entire system because they may be needed for non-public or special ed.
Okay, and then final question for the call center. Just a suggestion, I guess, more than a question. You had said that it would be open August 20th to September 10th, but with the start of school being, I believe, September 6th, would we be able to possibly extend the end time, just in case
Sure.
we're running into problems?
Generally, these call centers get closed down after the first week of school. You have high volume of calls the last couple days of the summer, high volume in the first few days of school, then most of the problems are dealt with, and you can go back to the normal answering of telephone calls after that.
Okay. I think that's it for me now. Thank you.
All right, moving right down. Scott, do you have any?
No, I think most of the questions that I would think were asked, obviously there's a financial impact to this that I'm not sure you calculate or Dave calculates or who calculates that nowadays, but certainly we ought to understand the financial impact as well.
Well, the buses are costing you roughly $45,000 to $50,000, depending on the size of the bus. So if you're eliminating 11 buses, that's about $500,000.
Thanks. Mike?
Just to clarify, do you know exactly how many 72 passenger versus 84 passengers we have?
Well, we counted the 84, and I believe there were 7 or 8 84 passengers. I don't have the number of the 72s.
The rest was 72. And your dots on these graphs where it lists time, Kim's comment just caught me off guard there. Are these the average time that a student is spending on the bus, or is this?
No, that's the maximum
total?
time.
That's the maximum.
That's the maximum time from the
correct.
bus garage to the school.
Okay, just want to make sure.
When you look at that, one thing that should be understood is that in some of these cases you have 10 minutes or more of that time to get to the first stop.
Okay. I mean, I kind of went through this in terms of probably a little bit more detail than I probably should have, but in my mind, it's not a do we do this or don't we do this. It's kind of picking and choosing the right spots where this seems to work. And I liked how you put in the revised optimized this evening, where we started to see where we might need buses added back in, because based off of the charts, I mean, it looks like Arrowhead, your revisions, I mean, you're keeping the same number of buses, you're saving the travel time there, and there's not really a change in, you're not eliminating any buses there. Audubon, when it was, optimized to 6 buses, if you have 6 buses, you're looking at every single bus at 67 or more students. So I think that is an area where you want to go back and add in that bus, because, I mean, my daughter goes to school there. She's on one of the buses that already has students there, and I can tell you right now that you don't want that many students on a bus, and especially on every bus that goes to that school. Eagleville looks about the same to me, 6 to 6. The things that are glaring to me is, were you surprised to see how far off our routes were? I mean, we're saving, a third of the time, half the time with some of these. I mean, these are significant saving times in terms of driving.
Correct. I think what happens is, would you just make the minor changes from year to year, minor adjustments? If a few kids left the bus, a few more you'll have to put on to fill the bus. You can get these routes to be overlapping. And I think back a few months ago, we showed you the extent of overlapping routes. So what they've done now is they've said, let's send a bus into this region, another bus into this region, another bus into this region, whereas previously those 3 buses might have overlapped a little bit. And I think that's the reason for the reduction in the total mileage, total time.
Okay. Just looking through here. It's kind of hard because I don't know if any of did the steering committee see this exact presentation that we're seeing this evening?
Yes, except for on those scattergrams, they didn't see
red.
the red notes. Those red notes about consider adding a bus or several buses here were their recommendations at the meeting last Thursday.
Okay. I would say that, it's easy for us to kind of look at things and see the model behind everything, but one of the things where you talk about overloading the high school, because, certain number do drive and everything, that I think it's important to get feedback from the bus drivers specifically for the high school, and probably even Arcola at that point, to see how many kids really are getting rides to school versus not. I mean, I think getting true feedback from the bus drivers, and certainly in some of these levels here, is imperative. And I feel like, we heard this evening that there wasn't any on the steering committee. I just want to make sure that, their feedback is making it into this system as well.
Correct. Now, we do have good data on that. We have the ridership data at various points during the year. So we can say there were this many students assigned to that bus, but only this many rode. And that can vary by neighborhood, and it can also vary by the age of the students at the high school. At the 12th grade, many of them are driving either themselves or with friends, whereas the 9th and 10th grade, that would not be the case very often, except if it were a sibling or a close neighbor or something.
And my last question is, do you have a a general target number that you're looking for in terms of ridership per bus? In terms of, you start to see you have 7 buses going to school, 5 of them have over a certain amount, we should add in another number. I mean, it looks to be like that 62, 63 passengers.
Correct. We're trying to hit the maximum capacity that we've calculated at 2.5 to the seat for the elementary and 2 for the intermediate school and the high school.
Okay. So the only question school-wise that I would have would be the Worcester, where it was originally 10 runs to 7, and then adding back in the 2. It looked like even if you just did it at the 7, you have 5 buses that are running under 60 passengers per bus, and then you do have the 2, which are 66 and 69. So I imagine you would try to get that down, and I obviously don't know the distribution of the students that are making up those 2 buses, but I don't know that you would necessarily need to add in the 2 there. Could you get away with just the 1 route there? So that would just be something to keep an eye out for a school that caught my eye. And that is it, Brenda. Okay. Thank you.
One of the comments you have on successful implementation, actually there are 2 items. One is training and testing drivers on new runs and routes and supervise the drivers, and then bus drivers know their runs and routes. Throughout this year, we've had comments from parents about bus drivers not seeming to know where they were going and taking different routes on different days, and that was particularly the case when we acquired some METS buses, where there were different routes that were taken by some of those drivers. And so I wonder if you could comment on the issue of training and testing drivers, the success for it, and what perhaps aids you might provide that might help the drivers to be able to do their routes better.
So every driver will get from the computer system, and the routes, by the way, are two of these books at this point, but every driver would get a map with the numbered stops on it, and then they would also get turn-by-turn directions. So in this case, for example, it says a right turn on Cribble Mill, go 1/10 of a mile. Then a left on West Germantown Pike, go 0.4 of a mile. So these are the driving directions, and they also have a map. So they would go out with this and test the route so that they knew exactly how to run it. And then if they had any concerns about that, they would come back to us after doing their runs and raise those concerns, and we might go back out with them and see if we could address it. So of the runs that I've done, probably over a dozen at this point, there was only one that had any significant concern about turning directions and so forth that is going to take a rerouting. Now, there was another one that had a road closure situation that we'll have to deal with. So when the drivers go out and do these dry runs, they have to come back, give us immediate feedback, any problems they note, and they'll be shown how we want them to do that as well. And they'll be asked to record their times. We also have what's called Zonar, which is a system that allows us to track the times as they go around the bus route, including the amount of time they stop at every stop. So we can track them by Zonar. We can also look at their notes on the route sheet.
Okay, so did we not have this past year, this book?
Yeah, I don't know the extent of what you had this year, but it's really critical as you tighten up all these times that the drivers are very cooperative and well-trained, and that we work with them to be sure that we get any input that they have. They'll have very legitimate input. They'll know how many light cycles it might take to go through a congested intersection. They'll know whether a certain stop has to be a door side only stop, or whether a student can cross the road. And for the most part, we have door side only stops set up by these routes that are already developed. So
Okay.
they will bring a lot of input back to us, and then there will be a discussion of every route, be sure they're satisfied with it, and all this has to occur in the next 6 weeks, so it's a busy time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your work.
I I have a lot of clarifying and comments, more so after hearing everybody. And first, that book, that's your book, you as the transportation consultant. That's not a first student book.
Correct. At this point, what the router has done is put all of this onto their FTP site and allowed us to print off copies of it. So as we're going out and testing, and as we will add in additional buses, for example, we'll get this to the point where we then turn it over to the drivers on a route-by-route basis.
And Mike brought it up already. You said there was a third meeting in August, and I realize that, there's reasons why different people come to meetings, and I think it's great that the parents were there and other people, but I would say that, I would reiterate what Mike said, a rep from first student I don't think is enough, because a rep is very different from the person that does the job. So I would think that a driver or two or three need to be there, because I like what you're saying, and there needs to be discussion of this and blah, blah, blah. I'm just wondering when all that occurs, because I know as a teacher, when you start the school year, there's not a lot of discussion that occurs, because you're hurrying up trying to get ready. You've only got so much time to get ready, and then things start, and you've got 80 kids in front of you on a bus or 25 of you in front of you in the classroom. So that's...
Actually, we had three
me.
representatives from First Student. One is the longtime dispatcher who'd worked for the district, who's now employed by First Student. The other is their manager at this site, and then the regional manager. They've been at all meetings.
Okay. And then, I'm sure you are aware, I look at this as nothing. We've had some major issues in the last year or two. But I look at this as, I'm not saying separate than that, but sort of separate than that. No matter whether we had issues or not, this needed to be done because students change year to year, like you said. So I think it's hard for people to separate the problems that we've had with this. Like, this all sounds great, but because there has been some issues, I think that's where we're going to hear, and that's where we up here and people who are concerned about this see that. So when I look at this, and I see the original, the optimized, and the revisions to consider, I look at this and go, oh, thank goodness there's revisions to consider. And I can only give you my personal experience, because I don't know everyone else's. I know there's been difficulty. I can tell you, I have 3 children that all attend the same school. We have had, and people are probably not going to, an incredible experience. Never a late bus. Never any problems whatsoever. We have the most incredible driver. I mean, I can't believe it, like, honestly, in 6 years. So, but I know that that's not the norm, always. However, when I spoke to my children about this, they said because they've never expressed, and my daughter's a safety, I mean, I do talk to them about the bus. Their bus is full to the brim. They tell me in the morning, when they go stop off at the last stop or one of the stops, which is a daycare, it is squeezing them in. And my daughter's always like, I have to be careful, Mommy, because the second graders aren't supposed to sit with the. And so and they go to Woodland. So when I see originally 5, then 4, then the revised as 5, I go, thank goodness, just to let you know that. And the other issue that people bring up is when you're optimizing those buses, we all know, and I don't want to, I've never heard any issues about this, but when I asked my children about this, they said there's a young man who isn't supposed to sit near anybody. Not only a seat, not only is no one with him in the seat, but optimally he's supposed to have the seat next to him and the seat behind him empty, if they can, because he's not the best behaved on the bus for whatever reason. And that can only happen in the afternoon. So these are the things why I would love, the most revisions and looks into this, so it's not just, I think people think it's just cost cutting. I don't look at it like that. I think it makes sense to look at these things again, but that's why I want I appreciate all the extra time to look into this. There was one other question I had, but I think everyone's pretty much said it, and I'm sure other people have questions or comments. But I like the revisions to consider personally.
Hey, Chris.
A lot better.
Thing that came up then as I'm going through this. First, I want to thank you very much for doing this. This is a very daunting task to go through and redo these routes. And, you know, basically the routes that we have now have not changed, at least since I've been on the board, 6 to 8 years, you know. So you've got a lot of different things, and that's why the scatter plots here are all over the place on some of these original routes. One of the things that triggered a question is using the technology on the first student buses. If we do rely on that would, I'm not sure if the other vendor, Metz, has the same technology, but I'm banking they don't. So that would be incumbent to make sure that we use that for the tracking of the bus runs and making sure that those times are accurate. The only concern I had was overlapping runs, and I've seen too many of that, idling buses and things like that. And I know that probably some of this does away with some of that. How much of an impact does that have on the idling buses sitting along the sides of the roads and things like that?
What you had before is a lot of buses that were doing 1 or 2 tiers, and those would be buses that would have idle time. Now you're decreasing the number that just had a single tier. You're increasing the number with 2 or 3 tiers. So there should be a lot less idling alongside the road waiting for the next school to run to start.
Okay. And then when you go to those tiers, you're pretty confident that you can run all those tiers. I mean, in other words, those buses can be used for, I mean, it went from that one, what is it here, from 3 to 18 on the tier 1, you know, or from 18 down to 3. So those buses are going to be used a lot more.
Right.
Okay. I guess what I'd like to see is and I too would like to see the revised optimization be put into effect. I think some of those those numbers on there are too full for those buses. And, you know, by the time you start throwing in like band instruments and things like that, things can get even more crowded. The one thing on the financial impact of this is it would be to see how long some of these buses are running. I know you don't need going down 11 buses, but also some of these buses will be running a lot longer. In other words, they'll be running all 3 tiers, whereas some of them were not. So that's another impact that we have, is whereas you had some buses just sitting there idling, well, they were just using fuel, or they might not have been using fuel at all. So I mean, are you able to, through your programs, are you able to judge the fuel impact, the fuel usage impact?
We can do something with the fuel impact. Largely it's coming off the total mileage.
Right.
So we would be calculating that, but there's also an added amount for drivers with more than 4 hours a day, so there's a minor financial calculation that has to be done around that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sorry, I just found my last question in my notes, and I had said how I've been lucky, and I'm one of many, but I wanted to bring up Skyview because I know that it went from 21 to 19 and then 21, and I would just let you know, and anyone on the committee, I have heard children being late, excessively late to school, and that cannot happen again next year, because that's no, I'm not talking about, I meant because of the bus run or a problem with it, not a child being late. I mean the bus getting to school late. So again, I just wanted to reiterate, the revision looks better.
Correct. So what the principal needs to do in the first couple weeks of school is record the time that bus is arriving, and immediately bring to our attention if their buses are getting there even a few minutes late, so that can be addressed right away.
And that's part of the typical procedure at the beginning of every school year at every building.
All right, I finally have a chance now. I guess the assumption is when you're reducing number of buses and optimizing that, the seating goes up on the majority of the buses. Do you know offhand how many buses where there's actually a reduction in the number of students that you're anticipating to be in on the bus?
If we take the numbers back up to the revised number of routes, we've really affected just a few routes in that case. So I can't remember what the number is you have it in front of you, but it's not that many routes being reduced.
Okay.
So, we'll have to look at this ridership issue, particularly at the high school, pretty carefully over the next month, because as I, in the last few months of school, was here at the high school a few times, many of those buses were coming in or leaving without even one person on each seat. So there were significant excess capacity at the high school level.
So the math works out on all these in your presentation and everything, and so it shows some significant reductions. How accurate is that? Do we have references from other school districts that have implemented this and they actually see that level of change? I'm trying to understand, when you say these are the numbers you're going to see in terms of, average time or average number of students. If you do a retroactive look or retrospective look to school districts that have implemented this, do they actually see those?
But I think the situation is different in every district. In this district, having Arcola and Skyview in the corner of the district and a very long travel distance has a unique situation. But I think what we have to do is look at the capacity of each bus, the ridership at each level, and just be satisfied as a community that we're filling the buses to a reasonable capacity. We don't want to, of course, be overcrowded, but again, we don't want to have empty buses running around the community or unnecessary buses, because they're all traveling. One of the things to think about it, they're all traveling at the height of rush hour, so if those buses are stopping along the road too frequently or there are too many buses, it's really creating a problem for the community in terms of rush hour traffic.
How much of a transition is it for the riders and their families? So when you implement this level of change where you're seeing a 30% reduction and you're shifting the loads around quite a little bit, how impactful is it to the families?
One of the things you have to look at, and one of the reasons for a July notice to parents, is that parents make child care arrangements, and it might be one parent leaving home later and getting the kids on the bus or dropping them off somewhere at another location or at a child care location or something. So all these child care arrangements, parents need enough time that they can revise them. So we would put them on notice in July that there will be some changes, and so if traditionally they've had a certain time, they need to be able to adjust that time by 15, 20 minutes for child care alone. So there are a lot of impacts, and that's why parents will need to be notified, and the communication really needs to be started very quickly.
Okay. I think that's it for me. Mike?
Sorry, I just had a couple of quick follow-ups. Mr. Roth had mentioned the METS buses. I'm assuming with even if with the revised optimized, we would no longer have the need to have to go to METS. The first student should be able to...
METS does 4 buses at this point.
Right, so in that case, we would only have to work with first student, correct?
Let me just interrupt.
Okay.
At the end of the school year, METS no longer provided that service to us. That was the agreement to the end of the 15-16 school year. So this does not include additional METS buses of any sort. So this is all first student. That was what we agreed to going into this school year, that we would use first student exclusively.
Yeah. And along with that, because the mention of METS just brought this up, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think when we were talking about having the 4 METS bus runs, that we had heard that there was 95 total runs, and it was 91 from first student and 4 from METS. but how does that compare with the total runs that we're seeing here as original from last year?
Okay, 55 of those 95 would have been the public regular education buses. The remainder would have been the non-public and the special ed.
Which are not included.
They're not in here at this point in time.
Okay, and last question is, so BusBoss is our software, correct?
BusBoss is a software that you have the license for, and it's a large database with a computer mapping system built into it.
So my question is, in terms of moving forward, beyond this year, is there training in place with district employees who can follow up with this year after year so that we don't, 5 or 6 years down the road from now, wind up in the same boat that we're in now? Is this a...
Yes.
Okay.
I think what I would recommend to the school board is annually, per the school code, you should have some approval of the routes. And I would just demand that approval give you the kind of information that you've seen here tonight, proving the efficiency of the system.
Okay.
And so you can have some control over that. The computer has innumerable reports, but you need to have something that makes you feel comfortable that the efficiency is what you expect.
Okay. And I would think that as a board, we would all want to see that as well. Thank you very much.
So you have a good sample here of the kind of things that you can get pretty easily from the BusBoss system, or have the transportation staff develop for you.
Great. Thank you again.
So one of the things that we're looking for this evening, while we're not asking for your vote on any matter, because as Mr. Schuck has mentioned, once we get to the final routes, then we will be seeking you to approve those routes. But we have work between now and then, and we're looking for some guidance. So while there are 3 options that Mr. Schock has laid out and that we've discussed, I've heard some comments that the revised optimization would be preferred, but I don't know if I heard that from everyone. So there's a full optimization, a revised, and a partial implementation. And maybe there's some other rendition as well, but these seem to be the 3 most logical options for giving Mr. Schock some direction, and our transportation team and the transportation committee some direction to going forward.
To consider these 3.
I would ask you to consider one of these 3 to give us that direction, with possibly some, I know Mr. Ryan mentioned some additional thoughts. Maybe it's the revised optimization with 1 or 2 of those other items, something to that nature.
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction would be that to go with the revised optimized with the second look at Worcester, and I think you're already going to be looking at the high school. But I think that the rest of this looks pretty good. That's my recommendation.
I agree.
Opposed to doing that? I mean, to give them a bit of direction.
I'm not opposed to it, but I think there's a significant input here, in that we need to make sure that we're not missing something, and that's the input from the drivers. So, as we circle through for the next month or so, there may be other issues that the 9 of us don't know about, or there's other concerns that we're not stepping into something here. So I would like to see some of those, before we're talking exact. I think a modified number is correct, but I'm not a bus expert, and I think the drivers are the closest to the customer. So in this case, I think we need that input.
I think that Mr. Schock also concurs with that. I mean, that's why we're here. Their input will be a result of running those dry runs and giving us a thought. So we may say that we're looking at the revised, and it may be, the elimination of maybe 11 buses, but when it's all said and done, it might only be 5. It could be any number, to make sure that our goal is really to make sure that our experience is much better than what it was this past year, and in addition, to make sure that we're running in a manner that's efficient and effective for our operation.
One other concern here. I also don't want to see us end up in a situation where we've gone down this road of revised optimization, and it comes time in August to vote on the approval of the routes, and we see something that, we've got students that are on the bus for far longer than we're comfortable with, but we have no choice but to approve the routes because school's about to start. So I want to make sure that we are apprised of progress as we move forward and not waiting until it's time to vote in August to get the information when it's too late to actually make any real change.
I'd like to dovetail into that, but by saying that was also one of my concerns, Kim, because all too often we don't see these runs until the end of August, and school starts in a week and a half later. I would propose that you'd have that run be actually, and I'm not a proponent of this, but in this case I think we need to do it, of having those runs available for approval at the work session, because of that very idea that if the work session if we see something in there, then you have another week to fix it, and then you could always reevaluate that and have it ready for another vote on.
We don't really need to approve it at the work session, but have it available at the work session to review.
Well, that's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
that we all have it in front of us, so we get the final product, and if it looks good, then we're good to go for the following week.
There's, I don't disagree with what you're recommending. I'm just thinking logistically, there's some challenges in doing all that in the order that we need to do them. Because in the middle of all that, to get your approval, we also have to give notification
To the parents.
So what I'd like to be able to do, so that certainly this works in a way that doesn't put you as board members in a position that you're not comfortable with in approving, and to give you all the information you need in order to make a decision. I'd like to be able to at least take the concept of going with the revised optimization, the recommendation that Mr. Ryan had mentioned with the look at Worcester and high school, and make sure that we answer the questions that were asked here this evening that we didn't get complete answers on. So for example, the amount of time for each student ride. So I think we need to do that. That's a good piece of information for you to have. In addition, I'd like to logistically plan it out so that this is the way we think we can sequentially bring it before you in order for your approval. And I don't want to try to think off the cuff here today. I think Mr. Schock and I need to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to do this? When do we give notification to parents and all those pieces? So if you're okay with that, we'll start in this manner, and we'll make it so that we put a plan before you. We can then publicize that plan and make it available to the public as well, so they know that this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and that's the sequence of actions. That way, we're being very forthcoming with how we need to communicate. That's my recommendation, so that we can continue the work. The router can continue doing their work. We can start the dialogue with the drivers and first student about how to best address some of the questions and the routes, and move forward like that. So that's my thought.
Hey, Chris, since we do have Bob here, if he's available, I don't know what the circumstances are. I just put it out there to allow for courtesy of the floor related specifically just for the transportation issue, why Bob's here.
Yeah, normally we'll have courtesy of the floor at the end during the work sessions, but since all of the bus-related things are the hot topic for tonight, why don't we just do
Only bus-related items.
only bus-related, transportation-related items. John, I thought you were just waving at me. You want to get up and speak?
Can I ask one quick question, John? Sorry to and you brought it up. You brought up July notification, which is great, and I know we can't give specifics in July. I totally get that. And someone actually yesterday told me, I'd love my kid to be on the bus longer, because of childcare, and you brought that up. So the July notification to parents, is that just FYI, your bus time's going to change, probably going to change, it could be a little bit later, it could be a little bit earlier? Is that what you mean by July notification? Okay, and that, I just want to double check.
Just to clarify, so we're opening it up to courtesy of the floor related to the specific bus thing. Any comments or information you want to share on other transportation matters? We'll wait till the end to the general courtesy of the floor. Okay.
Fair enough. John Andrews, Lower Providence. I was waving my hand primarily because we may have a long meeting, even assuming we hold to the agenda, but, as a courtesy to Mr. Schock, some questions by members of the public might benefit from his being here, and so, maybe we can let him go when this part of the agenda is complete, if we get pertinent public input. And one question I had is that the scattergrams, as Mr. Schock described, portray the time from the bus garage to the school. And I think that, we spoke of the students on the buses being the customers, and I think we should look at the time from the first student pickup to the school. It may take 15 minutes for the bus to go from the bus depot to the start of the pickups at Arrowhead, for instance. So if we're showing 60 minutes on the chart, it's not correct. It's really 45 minutes in terms of student time on the bus. And I think scattergram adjustments can be made for that.
It's a good point, John.
With the exception of the high school. Well, maybe not with the exception of the high school. And I also think that where there's talk of adding 3 or 5 buses to the optimized output of Bus Boss, that we need a new scattergram showing how those buses would change the scattergram, like ASAP. But I personally think that adding buses to the Bus Boss optimization should probably is just to decrease efficiency. And I think this is an instance of where education is always wanting more money, but then when private industry or Bus Boss or a consultant comes into the picture, well, there's a 30% efficiency improvement, and I think that's to be applauded. So there's a question of, well, is the public school system being effective or efficient? And I leave that to your judgment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, my name's Bob Garrett. I'm a resident of Lower Providence. I'm also a bus driver. I'm probably the least experienced of the crew up the stairs. I had a couple of questions, and one is when are you actually doing your test runs? What time of the day have you been doing that?
I've been trying to do them as many as possible at the time we'd actually be running them.
So you're doing them at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning?
Correct, as many as possible.
I mean, I would think you'd want to do them all.
Yeah.
All the routes being affected at 6:30, 7 o'clock to duplicate exactly what's going on, and vice versa, 3:30, 4 o'clock, because we all know what the traffic is coming down off of 422 at 4:30 in the afternoon. I've lived here 40 years. I've seen it and lived it. So I would ask that the test routes be actual, not estimated routes. And I think I have an MBA from Wharton in operations research, and I've done this for very large companies around the world. And I think anytime you change something very specific like this, you really have to have a contingency plan in place, and you don't have that. If this goes wrong, you're screwed. And I think you need to have access to Bus Boss technicians. I don't believe your consultant is. I'm not sure who we have on board. But if you're in mid-August and you're seeing problems, the chances of getting rerouted routes in place in time for the school year is going to be a problem. And it's going to come back to you folks, not First Student or anybody else. My comments. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Hello, my name's Karen Maycourt, and I'm a First Student driver. Are you the guy that did the North Penn Consortium thing?
Yes.
That, I remember being a disaster. My kids were involved in that. I mean, my kids got to school an hour and a half late because it was North Penn, Upper Dublin, West Hicken, and I mean, you could see it. You could just Google North Penn Consortium, and you'll see it all come up. This is my 14th year here with Methacton. I've had pretty much the same run the whole time. When you're doing these runs, like my running, for example, I go down into Bettswood, okay? I'm 90% of the time run on time. If there's an accident on 422, I sit at Trooper Road and Audubon Road. Did you take that into consideration? Why are you paying him this amount for this? Plus you're paying Bob Laws, plus you're paying the call center, and what's the other thing that you're going to pay? You guys couldn't wait to outsource us. Now you're spending more money. I mean, nobody asked us drivers. I've had the same run for 8 years, somewhere around there. I know my kids. Also, you're going to, put this in, we're going to see how many kids really ride. Well, by law, if a kid's name is on that roster, you have to provide a seat. Because guess what? The high school kids, they may not ride every day, but when it snows, we're loaded. So if you guys add to our seats, because Susie Q doesn't ride all the time, that falls on us. And my other thing is, my run, I do the VOTEC. Now, I didn't receive, and Diane didn't receive, and our other driver, Harry never received an updated route sheet or passenger list. You know when I got mine? May. Bit late. And you know how I got it? Because I pestered them constantly. So if we were to get pulled over by the police and I didn't have an updated run sheet or passenger list, is Methacton going to back me up? I don't think so, because that falls on me. So, I mean, why are you paying all this? Why don't you just let First Student do what we were paid to do? Do the routes. Ask some of the drivers. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, I mean, I don't know, the runs do need to be revised. I agree with that. But this all looks good on computer. But this area is unbelievable with traffic. I mean, there's days Germantown Pike, it's backed up from Mount Kirk all the way to the high school. I can't fly over these cars. And then when we're late, the parents, who catches it? Not you, we do. The parents like, well, how come you're late? Traffic. And then in the beginning of the school year, the big thing is, parents are given one time, we're given a totally different time, which could be like 15 minutes difference. I mean, First Student made some mistakes in the beginning, absolutely. But it's not all us. There's a lot of miscommunication, and like I said, my route sheet, I had to beg for, and I didn't get it till May. So I just wanted to let you guys, that's all I had to say.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
Okay, good job, man.
How you doing again? Hello all, how are you? My name's Charlie Falco. I'm a 34-year resident. I am, 10 years with Methacton, 2 years with First Student. I'm also the chief shop steward for the Teamster local, okay? Now, I don't even know where to begin. I really don't about all this, because there's so many discrepancies you're not hearing. It's all fine when you get a report like this on paper, but when you get something in actuality, it's a totally different story. Okay, we deal with the actuality. Us drivers deal with the actuality. What Karen just said, multiply it by all of us. Listen to it. You have a radio, Dr. Zerbe, I believe, in your office. I believe Stuart used to have one in his office. Just listen to the radio in the morning sometimes. You'll hear it. We'll give you a complete traffic report of the whole area because it's a mess. When you talk about times, he's running times during the summer. It's a joke. There's times different for a Monday. I can tell you now, every Monday in the spring, there's no traffic down on Germantown Pike or on Ridge because they're just still at the short points. Come Tuesday, oh my God, forget it. Ridge is backed up past East Mount Kirk all the way up to Eagleville Road. So, I mean, this all comes into play. When you talk about bus boss, well, my idea of bus boss is a joke because bus boss has given me directions that says turn left and there's not even a road there. Okay, bus boss is not the way we do business. The way we do business is according to contract, we write our directions out in the beginning of every year and hand them in. By contract, we have to do them. We're paid to do that by first student. So the driver sits there and gives the actual directions to the office. And those directions then are given to a separate driver if he has to do my route that day. So there's so many discrepancies here that come into play. Does it need to be revised? Yeah. I have 4 kids I put through this school district. I have grandchildren now going in this school district or that are in this school district. Do I think it needs that we crisscross each other and maybe we could pick up some stops on this? Yes, we can. But what you don't understand, you talk about high school. I do a high school, an Arcola run, and an Audubon run. My high school, my average is about 24 kids. You know why? Of course they don't all ride. I can tell you now, I got 7 kids come to one stop, I get 1, because the rest of them were juniors and seniors. But again, give that snow day, all of a sudden 3 of them, 4 of them show up. But we still got to go to every stop. We can't sit there and go, I don't feel like going to that stop that day. You can't do that, so that takes time. You still got to go there, no matter what. I got to show up at that stop, whether it's the high school, Arcola, or grade school. You can't throw 60, 70 kids on a grade school run. Imagine watching 60, 70 kids. Put your own kids to mind. I got to sit at the school for a few minutes before they sit there and take the kids off the bus. I got 45 kids in the back of that bus. They go nuts, and I got to deal with it. And I tell you what, I don't mind dealing with it because I dealt with criminals in my life. It's easy to deal with kids. I worked 26 years with criminals. Kids are easy, okay? I love working with the kids. They make my day. I love my grandchildren, but I'm going to tell you what, I don't want any more of them on my bus. So all I'm trying to say to you guys, you better look at everything. The last thing I want to tell you about is we're talking about pushing this off to August or whenever. By contract with First Student, which was always the way it was with Methacton, we get our runs posted around the 10th of August. That's when they're supposed to be posted for us to look at. We bid on our runs the 17th of August. So we can do our dry runs, which we get 2 of them with First Student, okay? So we're prepared for the day after Labor Day or beforehand if it has to be. If not, we're not prepared. You can't dump this on us 2-3 days before school starts and go, well, know what the hell you're doing. Well, most of us do. Like Karen does the same run every year. I've picked the same run the last couple of years because we got seniority. People that don't have the seniority, what happens is if the person in front of us picks a run that's different than they picked before, well, what do you think happens down the line? Everybody changes. So now we all got to sit there and know those runs. I don't mind doing my dry runs. Heck, I'm being paid for it. But at the same token, don't dump it on me 2 days before school starts. And then say to me, well, why were you late to this stop? The parent cried about it. Well, we're late because we don't know where the hell we're going. And this is basically what I'm trying to tell you. If you're going to do this, if he's going to sit there and you're going to allow them to make changes, make first proper changes, not just changes because you want to save money. Make the changes that are needed to be made. And then on top of that, give us the time to do our job correctly. I love this school district. I lived here 34 stinking years. I'm not moving. I will die in this school district. Sorry about that, guys. But I'm just telling you, I want to do the right thing by my students. I love them all. I want to get them to school safely. I want to get them home safely. And that's what I got to say here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, as we're discussing up here, we did say, you know, we need to get the bus drivers more involved, and I think we're getting good examples of why we need to have them more involved, because it's a very different perspective, and it's more of a realistic perspective of what goes on day to day.
Hi, I'm Diane Gambone. I'm a driver for the district. The other thing that has to be in these routes is we have to do our routes safely, but we also have to do turnarounds to go and pick up students on the right side of the road. There's like Pauline's Road with our new buses. We can't go down Pauline's Road underneath the railroad bridge. These are all things that have to be considered. Did you ever try to go out Creeple Mill Road and make a left on 73? I have. Have you tried to make a left-hand turn off of 73 on the Wentz Church Road? I have. These take time. So when you sit here and say a child's on that run for 60 minutes, let's stop and think about that. Why? Not only that, if you know us, like Karen said, she runs late, she picks the mic up, tells us there's an accident, all points bulletin goes out, and other drivers pick up the students. We all work together. We all care about one another, and we all make sure our children are safe. You cannot have a student crossing Ridge Pike. You cannot have a student crossing Germantown Pike. You can't have a student crossing Egypt Road. That is why you see two buses sometimes crisscrossing. One goes up one side, one comes down the other side, because it's not time efficient to try to keep turning these buses around. You spend maybe 10, 15 minutes trying to turn a bus around. My bus comes out of Surrey and Mill Grove. You have to sit at that traffic light coming out of Surrey. That light coming out of Surrey doesn't move fast. It stays 15 minutes green coming down Egypt Road. What am I supposed to do? Not allowed to turn right on red. That is our rule with first student. So anytime a driver is running behind, that driver picks up the mic, and you have 90 other drivers in the district that will help. Now, the bridge was closed. We have road closures over in Worcester. What are you supposed to do? Driver does the best they can. You guys need to come and talk to us. Nobody ever considers us drivers. You don't ask us questions. You don't come to know us. We are a family that works together. We pick our runs, we do our dry runs. We run our runs the first 2 weeks in September. We make corrections. We are the ones that are out there. We know what's safe and what's not. We adjust our runs with our supervisor. We don't need other people telling us that sit behind and look at diagrams and all this and say, well, it should be done this way. I, like any of you, at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, afternoon, excuse me, or 4:30, go down Germantown Pike. When you're coming out across Keys Road, try making a left-hand turn. That's my run. I sat there one day for 15 minutes trying to make a left-hand turn out across Keys on the Germantown Pike. We come out of River Road, make a left-hand turn out of there. These are all things that have to be considered. But none of you have come to know us drivers. Nobody asks us anything. We are the ones. Not only that, the high school only allows seniors mostly drive to school, some juniors. Just because you see our bus half empty, what are the kids supposed to be? Not in sports? Not in curricular activities? So you see that bus leaving here half empty. Consider why. Maybe because they're playing sports, but they're there in the morning. Trying to get into Skyview with the parents? That's a nuts. They block the driveway. They don't let us out, and they don't let us in. Same as high school with this new way here. This is a tragedy waiting to happen. You got parents coming in and you got buses going out. Now that you changed it, the buses that are behind empty, if there's a bus still unloading in front, that bus behind has to sit and wait. Because now we can't go around and leave to start our next run. So by doing what you did out here, you caused us to be later. Okay? The way Arrowhead is, not all big buses go in these schools. We have a mid-sized bus, too, that goes in the Skyview. There's a reason for it. We have little buses. We have mid-sized buses. Not all, when we have 584 passengers. Some are 72, the rest are mid-size. You have to look at the whole fleet. We don't use just big buses in all these schools. Some use mid-size. That's all I'm saying. You need to come talk to us. We are a great bunch of drivers. We work well. When one's in trouble, we all help. But none of you know that, none of you see that, not even him. That's what you have to consider.
I have a quick question for you. I teach 6th grade somewhere else, so we just changed where parents come in because this was an issue. So you're saying, and you said a lot, I'm not discarding everything else you said, but this stuck out to me. You are saying buses are late to Skyview because you're sitting there trying to get into Skyview, but there's so many parent cars that you can't get there.
Yes, and
Okay.
they're going in front of the school instead of making the right-hand turn and going around the back. They should not be, they're told not to go in front of the school, but nobody's there to stop them. So what happens is they're coming in front of the school when our bus is there. We're also not allowed to unload buses. If you would look at the post there at Skyview, it says do not unload buses from this point back. So that's one thing that's been brought up about parents. Well, why aren't those buses unloading? Did you see the sign? Safety reason. There's a sign on the post that says you are not allowed to unload from this point back. Safety. So you have to take that into consideration too. The weather. We're not going to go out there in bad weather and hurry up and say, bus boss says you have to be here at this time. No, I ain't doing it. I'll be there when I get there when I'm safe. Same as an accident. There's not a lot of ways to go around accidents. We do the best we can. But some of this dropping off at the schools, it's crazy. Especially the high school. This is a tragedy, like I said. This is unsafe. And so is Skyview and Arcola. Unsafe. Morning and afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
Candy Oliva, Eagleville. I remember having a conversation in this room 2 years ago when it was decided that we were going to sell the buses and get rid of all our bus drivers. Now, 2 years later, we still have more issues. I'm a taxpayer in this school district. My children, my 2 children, rode the buses for a total of 26 years. And before the district saw fit to unload the buses, we had the best bus drivers of any school district in the area because we were privately owned and they took pride in their job. And I trusted my bus drivers with my children's lives. Now, 2 years later, we were selling the buses to save money, but it's still costing us money. And they're looking at getting rid of more bus drivers. When does quality come in? I don't know if I'd want, and I don't blame the bus drivers for this at all. And to say bus drivers don't know the routes, the bus drivers that have been here 10, 15, 20 years know exactly where they're going. It's the new people they're bringing in that have no idea this area of Lower Providence or Worcester. And to talk and to reroute, has anybody thought about talking about the traffic in Lower Providence? Because we are a pass-through township. I live in Eagleville Road. One accident on Eagleville Road screws everything up. Now, I sit right in front of Arcola and Skyview. You want to talk about the buses being late? When my son went to the high school, he went from Ingleville Road to the high school. 4 out of 5 mornings, his bus was late. That was before the buses were sold. Can I finish? Because of the traffic. Now, I live on Ingleville Road. I sit in the morning and watch the traffic back up from Arcola past Visitation. Not because of the buses, because of all the kids in the cars with their parents. Now, the previous superintendent thought it was a great idea to put a traffic light in that corner and change the alignment of the intersection and put in a left turn lane. But the Einstein didn't want to spend the extra money to put in a left turn light. And I know this because I went through the PennDOT hearings to fight against that traffic light, and everything that has caused, I said was going to happen. Now, you get 2 school buses in a left turn lane, the traffic is backed up. And it's not the bus's fault, because I sit and watch half-empty buses go up to the school because the kids are sitting in the cars. Now, for an hour and a half, no one can get out of my driveway on Ingleville Road between the hours of 7:30 and 9 if they want to make a left. Because no one will let us out of the driveway. When my son worked in Oaks, he couldn't get out. Now he works in King of Prussia, he couldn't get out. Now the problem is, the minute it rains or it gets a little cold, all the parents put their kids in cars. And that's why a lot of the buses are empty. It's not the bus driver's fault. And if you're going to have a meeting to discuss bus routes and what's going to happen with transportation, don't you think it's important to have the employees at that meeting, the bus drivers, and have their input, not administrators or parents or anybody else you want to bring in, the bus drivers, because this affects them directly. And when anything affects the bus drivers or anything in the school district, it affects the taxpayers. Now, this issue was supposed to be solved when we sold the First Student. Why isn't someone from First Student here tonight? I mean, I don't know who's in charge of First Student now that Randy Williams left. Why aren't they here? I mean, all of a sudden, you're talking about doing this. Information is supposed to go out late July. Next week, it's July 26th. So are you going to have special meetings between now and the end of August to get all this information out to the parents? I mean, the first thing, if you want to talk about time in a bus, you have to deal with a problem in this school district with traffic. And I have watched the traffic get continuously worse every year. Even when that bridge opened on Arcola Road, that doesn't stop the problem during the school year for the bus drivers. I've watched bus drivers sit on Church Road to make a left onto Germantown Pike and sit there for 20 minutes because no one will let them out. But they're penalized if the kids arrive at school late, or they arrive home late, or they're stuck in traffic. So I would seriously think of it. But I have an issue with the fact that you want to get rid of more bus drivers. Why would you do that? I mean, I don't understand it. We've already lost a lot of very good bus drivers. Why lose more? I mean, I don't have any skin in this game. I'm not a bus driver. I had relatives that drove school bus here for a lot of years. But these were school district, we're still not treating employees, well, everybody but teachers, good in the school district. And if you're going to get rid of these bus drivers, how are you going to get qualified people to come in if they feel they're going to lose their job? So that's something you need to think about. You have qualified bus drivers. You have bus drivers that are loved. Because the minute something goes wrong, the parents aren't going to come in here and say anything. They're going to go on social media and complain, instead of coming here and addressing it. The bus drivers shouldn't have to come in here and fight for their jobs and to keep their jobs. But this is something, I don't understand why this is being rushed. This maybe should have been discussed in April, May, June. You were thinking of doing this. It's July. We're almost toward the end of July. School starts, what, a month and a week or so? So I think this is something you really need to seriously consider, because on the first day of school, first month of school, you're going to have a lot of upset parents. And I don't envy anybody in the school board that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Susan Reuter. I'm a parent of a Skyview student. I guess I'm the only one speaking on the parents' behalf. But I have some concerns about the numbers that are being plugged into the BusBoss software, because if these numbers were plugged in last year, I don't believe it. They were definitely hand-tweaked. The 2 students per seat capacity, 2.5 for elementary, not followed. 3 per seat, every single seat on my daughter's bus. So I'm not believing these numbers were ever punched in last year. I also the routes, I truly agree, were very inefficient. I, for 10 days straight, stalked my daughter's bus. I'm probably scared of the bus driver, but I followed them because I couldn't necessarily believe what she was telling me, because it seemed really ridiculous when I asked her the route. So I stalked the bus, followed it for 10 days, and the route was so convoluted. It was amazing. I really seriously thought, and I even contacted Mr. Laws, I said, a question, did you do this by hand? Because I know there's software out there, because I have a family member who is a transportation manager for a school district in Ohio. And when I sent her the Google map of the route, she's like, this was done by hand. She's like, some softwares are better than others, but none would ever think of this route. It was crazy. So I really question whether the software was really used or used appropriately, and will these problems come up again? Will we still be stuck with 3 seats per bus? So as far as the problems with Skyview that everyone's mentioning, I think with the parents blocking the buses, I think that congestion would be relieved if the buses drove efficiently. I, as well as many other parents, had to start driving their students to Skyview, and I think the number of cars must have quadrupled, a parent drop-off that never happened previous years. And that was because my daughter was given a 0 every morning on her morning math assignment because her bus was always late. She missed the assignment and the teacher was like, sorry, even though the bus was late, you get a 0. I had to start reworking my work schedule to drive her there, and the car drop-off lines got crazier every day. Speaking to other parents out the car windows, it was the same reason. I would prefer not to drop off my child, but I have to get them here on time. They're not getting here. Or they're standing in the aisle of their bus was another concern. The parents did not like that because there were not enough seats. So I didn't hear among all these options of one suggestion I think would be best so things aren't rushed. I totally agree that the routes have to be redone. And is there a possibility for this first year to have one option where the board votes where we redo the runs, try to optimize them because they truly are inefficient, and not decrease the number of buses? And then go through the school year and see how it works with these new buses. And if there are buses that are arriving so early now that the route is better and they're sitting in front of Skyview and no buses are late, then the next step would be, could we decrease the number of buses? But I think we need to take it in baby steps, because if all of this is done at once, I don't foresee it possibly working. I think it would be good to start with redoing the routes, making them more efficient so they're not doing a lot of these crazy turns, crossing Ridge Pike to pick up one student when there are other buses that go down that street. And one other issue I'd like to do to address her concern, because she was worried about this, but I had spoken with Amy Huffman at First Student, because it's hard for the drivers to learn the routes when there is a substitute every week. We had about 8 drivers in the afternoon bus route over the course of the year. It's not the driver's fault. They can't possibly learn the route when they're only there 1 week and then they're replaced the next week. So I might be wrong, but from what she said, if we decrease the number of buses, those bus drivers aren't going to lose their jobs. They will have places to put them at First Student, because they were short. They don't have enough drivers to give us, she said. And she said that falls on them. So if they're short drivers, if we have less buses, they're not going to definitely be firing their bus drivers. They'll just be sent to another district because they are short drivers, she said. So.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, let's move on.
So for next week, there will be reports by all the committee members. There were some committees that were held during the summer, and we'll have reports, but not all committees did meet, or did we have other meetings at the IU or the VOTEC. There'll be public comments on board action items. Board minutes will be for your approval. And we go to number 9, fiscal items. There'll be a list of bills and a treasurer's report. At this moment in time, are there any questions on the list of bills or the treasurer's report?
I'll just keep it real quick. For the Treasury report, and I briefly spoke with Dr. Zerbe about this, but I want the rest of the board to be aware of this, is that there were checks that came out of the Capital Reserve general account, again, for field-related items. And we had discussed as a finance committee before that moving forward, that they would be coming out of the capital campaign fund, which is what it was designed for. Last month, the problem with this was that there were no checks for the capital campaign, but moving forward that would be resolved. This month you'll see 2 checks came through and were taken out of the reserve. That will be backed out, and that money will be coming from the correct account. Is that correct?
Well, I just want to update the board on those statements. So what I did was I looked a little further at the issue, and it is true that at the Finance Committee meeting, we stated that any additional expenses going forward will be coming out of the capital campaign and not the capital reserve. But it's true that in your list of bills, there are, I believe, 2 checks that were issued from the capital reserve for the field project. In further looking at what we've done, there was a total of including those 2 checks, there was a total of $6,075.85 that were field project related that were also paid out of that. Now I want to bring that to your attention because that'll likely be seen in the next list of bills. I'm trying to resolve this because, in all fairness, our accounts payable, they did not receive the proper indication of how to pay those bills going forward. So they paid them as they normally would, and they paid them out of the capital reserve instead of the campaign. After looking at how to resolve the matter, and I immediately thought it would be easy just to do a transfer. But what I'm recommending is, now that I have a handle on this and I've communicated to accounts payable what they are to pay, that we allow these payments to be in the capital reserve so that there's no lack of transparency in the use of the capital campaign contributions from the public, because I guess what I'm trying to say is, when we document that we pay a field-related project out of the capital campaign contributions, we want to be able to show that, this is a check that was made for this bill. And we want that to follow without having a whole lot of, journal entries saying it goes here then here. So my recommendation is that we allow the $6,075.85 to be the last payments on the capital reserve for the field project, and all of the payments going forward will be out of the capital campaign, so that our accounting and documentation are what, in my view, properly accounted for. So that's my recommendation. As chairman of the Finance Committee, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think part of accounting procedures, journal entries are part of the business. So if you have a journal entry as part of the description for what you're doing as your transfer, you can also have a description for your transfer. So if there's any concern about, the public being confused, there should be the same description that would normally be there would be able to tell you what the transfer is for. It's just a little bit of the frustration of there was directive given, it didn't make it all the way through, and I think that when we have funds that are supposed to be used for certain things, that they get used for that. And I feel like we've mentioned this, we've brought it up now, and I'm not going to speak for the whole committee. They can speak and give their own opinion here, but I think it's important that the funds get used for what they really are. And if we say that moving forward this is okay, and it's a small amount of money, but I think the principle is still the same, that these funds were used for the field, not capital reserve.
You're absolutely correct, and I'm agreeing with you. And that's what we said we were going to do, but I'm taking responsibility for the fact that the accounts payable people were not informed properly, and it's not their fault. So it's a choice. If we want to do the journal entries, we can do that. I just don't want to confuse the effort. We can certainly do that, but that's not my recommendation. My recommendation is I tell you that it's ending here, at that total amount, and that all other payments for field-related projects will be coming from the campaign contributions.
Well, I think there's a little bit more to it than just a journal entry, because we're actually talking about a bank account. And actually, there needs to be a money transfer made, which would indeed need to be approved by the board, it would seem to me, in the normal process of events. But this points out some of the issues that we have to face as a finance committee, and, getting information together. So I would hope that we would have an opportunity to approve the transfer so that we see that it's happening.
Any other comments from the committee members?
I think you should have the accounting correct. At the end of the day, I would make it correct, take it from the right account, and just do the transfers. I mean, it's a de minimis amount of money in the grand scheme of thing. I don't disagree with you, but I think as you do your reconciliations on the total project, if it's not in the right spot, you're going to be off. So not a lot. It's probably a rounding error in the total project, right? But there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. So I think you just make it right.
That's fine.
I don't like
Well, I don't like making a lot of notations on things. That's why I'm saying here that's part of the problem.
But if it's only one, then let's make it and
So
get our accounting correct.
So if everyone else is okay, Paul, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we spend too much time talking about this. I think you should just make it.
Okay.
Make the change.
Sounds good. Any other comments on the list of bills and the treasurer's report? If not, we'll move on to personnel items. As you can see, listed for your approval next week. There's one resignation, professional, one classified. As you can see under 10F, there's a change of status professional. There's a change of status classified. There are 4 supplemental contract items for your approval. I just want to bring notice to you for item K1. It would actually be 10K1, the approval of the supplemental contracts for the fall coaches. That number currently, as of today, is $192,998.92. That will likely change by the time Tuesday comes because of other contracts that are coming in. So, and the list that's attached to this agenda item will also change as well. There's a lot of work that still is being done in HR to finalize that number, but I just want to make you aware of it. We have a list of volunteers, community education, and other advisements, as you see listed. Are there any questions on any of those items?
Last month, I'm sorry, we had talked about a furloughed position, and I'm not seeing that. It was supposed to be, I guess, added to the agenda for this month. Is that going to be added for next week?
Yeah, thank you. And then there are no curriculum.
Dr. Zerbe, just, maybe we're almost to the end of the dominoes, I would expect, for filling some of these positions related to the principals. So maybe even just a final roadmap of what the changes were made that Dr. Harney could provide for us that says the sort of final cheat sheet to understand all the changes in the process. That would be helpful. Thank you.
You mean from the changes in principles, or you mean the changes?
Well, the principles
for all
the moves during the summer.
Okay.
That's more or less what it comes down to.
Okay. Okay. There are no items for curriculum under policy. There are 4 items for first reading. I just want to bring your attentions to handbooks. I want you to know that the policy committee made many good recommendations to improve the consistency and the readability of the handbooks, which are being worked on as of this week. It is likely that some of the changes will occur between the first and the second reading. So we just want to pay attention to those between those two readings. But I want you to know that it's our goal to try to address as many of those changes as possible. While some of them are critical, others are more in line with the readability and the formatting, and those are the types of things that we want to be able to provide the most professional looking books that we can for our parents and our students to read. In addition, there are 5 items for your approval at Tuesday's meeting for second reading. Are there any questions on anything from related to policy?
Yeah, when I look through these, the policy 609, is that, I get a little confused from the date, the last revision type of thing. Is that a new policy, or it had a reference date of June 2016? So just I assume it's not new, but I'm not always sure what I'm looking at when it says revised 2006, 2016. So, I don't know, Kim, if you know that.
Paul, just to speak to that, the investment in district funds, that was one of the new policies from PSBA. It is a new policy that they put forth, and I think it had to be figured out within the first reading had to be last month, second reading had to be this month in order to get into the next school year. And Kim, please correct me if I'm wrong there.
And I had a question about the handbooks. Are they up for approval by the board, or are they administrative materials? I wonder if we have an obligation to do that, or whether we should do that.
Yeah, the handbooks include the student code of conduct, and by law, the student code of conduct should receive the board's approval. So while that's included there, not all the items that are being suggested as changes in formality are related to the code of conduct. But I believe it is a good exercise for the board to approve the handbooks on a regular basis. Then, if there's no other questions on policy, we look under other, the gift and donations, trips, and then there's dates for board members' calendars. Please know that missing from this list of dates, there's an August 15th, 2016 Policy Committee meeting at 6:30 p.m. at Farina. And that's all I have on board member dates. Is there any other old business?
This isn't really old business, it's just business from earlier tonight. Just hearing some of the bus drivers make some comments, I'm wondering if there was one possibility to get more feedback from them. We saw the book that Mr. Schock had with the various runs and the new proposed ones that he had in mind. I'm wondering if it's possible, and Chris might go like this, is statistical-wise, is taking a sampling of the new runs and then giving them to the drivers who currently hold those areas. Because we already basically have an idea of what the new runs are going to be. Can we get them to the drivers who normally run that so that they can provide feedback? I mean, you would think that would be something pretty quickly where those drivers might be able to, see this run. They know what their old run was. Here's the new run that, if they pick the same route again, could they provide feedback in a relatively quick manner, I would think. That's just an idea.
Thank you. I'll take note of that and share that with Mr. Schock. He tried to make it clear that, this process is not absent of driver input. And that's why, if you saw at the top of the things that we need to do, while we've used computers and we've used the best tools that we have, we're going to need to use our drivers to, flush out the details. And that's why, we can't go down multiple paths here. That's why we're trying to, apprise the board and the public of where we're at, so that we can engage the drivers appropriately in the right direction. So if we were saying we were going to reduce, one bus or two buses, or change certain routes to minimize things, well then we'd only have to use so many drivers to assess the outcomes. But while this seems to be a more comprehensive change, we're certainly going to need to get more input from them. So we want to make that clear.
Hey, I have just one thing, and I've heard this from my kids as well. This whole zero on an assignment if the bus is late appears to be a bit ridiculous. And I don't know if that's prevalent. I can tell you my kids came back one time and said, that it was an issue, and I made a call over to the school. This was before I was even on the board. It just seems that if it's out of their control, I think that's just a tad ridiculous that the teachers might take that stance, and maybe it happened only one time and only to her child. I don't know. But I think, Dave, that there's got to be something that goes to the teachers through the principals that says, listen, if there's a tardiness beyond the child's control, i.e. an accident, the whole bus was late, that is not something that should cause punitive damage to the kids. That just feels wrong in every sense. I don't know the context of it.
Yeah, right, but that's your reaction is appropriate, because that's the same reaction I had in going through my head when the person was speaking to that matter.
So maybe it's a discussion with the principals
yeah,
at
absolutely.
the start of the school year that says, listen, tardiness caused by buses not being able to deliver kids on time is just something you can't take out on the kids.
Well, we shouldn't affect their academic progress in the matter. Exactly. So I appreciate the comments, and I will have that conversation with the building principals. Thank you. In terms of any other old business or anything else from members of the board, if not, going on to new business, the PSBA voting delegates, I think that'll be, Mr. Borden will be talking about that at the meeting. And the only other thing that I want to share with the board is this afternoon, for most of the afternoon, Mark Fretz, board member Scott Dorn, myself, and members of AEM met on the facilities assessment draft document and went through a series of discussions about how to best categorize and prioritize this voluminous draft. So what we have is, I anticipate that we have a plan going forward. The plan will include a proposal back from AEM by the end of this week that I'll share with you in the board memo, and if appropriate, after I review it, I will put it on the agenda for your consideration so that we can keep on target to have a report before the property committee at their September 12th scheduled meeting. Because we need this as a part of multiple things. First, not only to address our facilities' needs, but we also need this as a mechanism for budgeting. So while it's not on the work session agenda here today, it really would mean that I would be asking if the proposal is appropriate and the deliverables are what we expect and the pricing is reasonable. We will ask that you approve that so we can move that process forward. Are there any questions related to that? Then there will be courtesy of the floor. I guess we need courtesy of the floor for matters other than, it could be any matter, right?
The other new business, the one item that will be added to the agenda later this week is at the regular meeting, we'll be discussing the contract extension of Dr. Zerbe at that meeting. So we'll add that item to it. Then we'll turn it over to courtesy of the floor. Anyone?
Brian Earnshaw, Lower Providence. Question regarding the supplemental contract for fall sports. Is that based on contract, the amounts on there? Is it under the MEA contract or?
For the coaches?
Yeah.
Okay, for the coaches. So in the MEA contract, there is a designation for a dollar amount associated to what's called a point.
Okay.
The points are then calculated based on a system that's been devised probably about 10, 12 years ago.
Okay.
And that document then determines based on the number of participants, the number of the length of the season, all sorts of parameters, and those points add up to a total dollar amount.
All right. The reason I asked that question is that it might be time to revisit that. You say it's 10 to 12 years old. A couple observations. The high school football team consumes 25% of the total. And when you look at that number, it's about 3 times what I think are similarly sized groups, one being like the marching band and the girls' field hockey teams. So in connection with the upcoming contract, which I think expires next year, might be time to revisit that as well. Just take a look at it and see what other districts are doing and all that kind of stuff. So just a thought. Following up on an item from the property committee meeting last month, there was the FEMA application for some cost recovery from the snowstorm. Did that get filed yet, or is that still pending?
I believe it was filed. I don't know. I don't currently know what the status is of that,
Okay.
but if you'd like.
Was the amount about 60,000, 70,000, somewhere in that ballpark, I think?
I can't, I won't guess on
Okay,
it.
all right, that's fine. And not to reopen the budget for this year, but one follow-up question. There was a number thrown around for estimated revenue from those new Shannondale buildings. I think it was like 600,000 or somewhere. Was that, trying to understand how that amount was derived, was that based upon current assessments for existing similar buildings? Or is that, I think Ms. Hackett, you might have come up with that number.
I did, and that was what I used. I used
Okay.
similar buildings that they had and
Okay.
the estimate of the amount of time they'd be open for the year.
So prorated for their 10 months out of
Yes.
12. So it didn't factor in the pending assessment appeal that Shannondale has filed. So chances are that number was probably a little bit overstated, given that we'd have to reserve some of it, assuming the appeal would apply to those buildings as well.
That's true.
Okay, thank you. That was all. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? This is the general courtesy of the floor, so you can comment on anything you want right now.
I'm Liz Drummond from Lower Providence. Hi. So I actually thought that Mrs. Reuter had a really good point regarding the transportation, possibly considering an implementation of first more efficient routes, next look at the reduction of buses. I'm just concerned because of, and also the gentleman with the Wharton MBA who was a bus driver who spoke, who was asking about a contingency plan. I'm just concerned because right now the district, the residents of the district are not overly enamored with the transportation services we've been receiving. So I would hate for these changes to be implemented, especially with this late input, it being July 19th, late input from the bus drivers, and it just seems like this is a rush to August. And maybe, it sounds like everyone agrees that there are more efficient routes, physical routes to take, but maybe the reduction of the buses is held off until a future year. Or maybe it's done mid-year, and like if something really makes sense, you do something mid-year, but a more conservative approach to this. I love the efficiency aspect of it, but a more conservative approach and not causing any future issues with the residents who don't already love the transportation all the time. I'm just saying. So, thank you.
Thank you.
John Andrews, Lower Providence. Relative to the buses, it seems to me that we're going to be in a very tight schedule, and I think many months ago there was talk of getting the shock report at the June meeting, and so one possibility is to do the bus rerouting in 2 phases, one for the start of the fall semester and then one for the start of the spring semester. The agenda for this meeting read relative to the fall sports coach roster that detail would be attached, but I guess it wasn't ready, so it's not attached. But last year, I found that there were some issues relative to the freshman football team. What was on the website indicated that only one game was played, and the freshman football coaches were listed with a varsity, and there were no freshman players listed. So I think that we need to tighten up on the roster of coaches by saying that we don't have a team, whatever sport it is, unless there's a minimum number of players at the start of the season. And then conversely, in the yearbook that came out in May or June, there was a photograph of 35 freshman football players, but none of them were listed as playing on the website. So there's some mix-up there. And I'm wondering if we can get dates on when the data portfolio is going to be issued. In the Quinn era, it was always issued in January, and here we are in July. And I know people were working on it in May, but it shouldn't be ancient history. And with regard to the list of bills, there was a sum of $58,000+ for AP exams, and I'm wondering, is that money that is collected from students and then reissued by as one payment by the school district? And I see Dr. Zerbe
That's accurate.
saying that is accurate. With regard to a waste management bill for June service, I think that's running, $6,000 a month, and I'm wondering if that's something that's put out to bid. It seems to me that's a huge amount of money, and do they collect twice a day at each school, or what justifies $6,000? And relative to there's various reimbursements on cell phones, and I'm wondering if we're still using things that used to be called landlines. And all right, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Candy Oliver, I just have one question. Is there any update on the search for a business manager, or has there been any bites on it, or do you have anybody you're interviewing, or maybe possibly having one soon?
Yeah, I can tell you that we have interviews scheduled this week for the position of Director of Business Services, and we hope to make a determination in the coming weeks, make a recommendation to the board, and that's conceivably why we don't have anyone sitting at the table today here, and it's also the reason why we haven't had finance committee meetings as well in the summer. So we're working towards that.
So hopefully we'll have one by the start of the school year? Fingers crossed?
That would be what we would like to see happen, absolutely, or even sooner.
Okay.
We should tell you that, this is a second round of advertisements that we put out, and a second round of interviews on that second round of advertisements. So, it's been challenging.
Well, good luck. I didn't see anything on the agenda, so I just thought maybe we should have an update. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, then this meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.